benefits spiritually. I want to go over some of the things that we talked about, because I've gotten a lot of flack from some of you people out there. A young lady by the name of M. Hale, she tried to convince me and tell me how circumcision is mutilation, and that her physics professor did an experiment that showed that somehow or other the child has some neurological damage as a result of circumcision. And this is absolute insanity. The greatest minds in modern times have just about all been Jewish. Karl Marx was the greatest theoretician on economic theory. Einstein and his associates were the greatest creators of new scientific theory. And the preponderance of Jewish doctors and lawyers, and the whole field of psychiatry by Sigmund Freud, and all of the great psychiatrists that opened up the field were all Jewish people. 99% of them were circumcised. You know, there was a great genius. His name was Rabbi Joseph Rosen. Joseph Rosen was a living encyclopedia, living computer, with instant recall and incredible analytic abilities. And those who understood the analytic abilities necessary for producing new ideas evaluated the genius of the rabbi against the genius of Professor Einstein. And the one who did the evaluation was the greatest poet in Israel, Chaim Nachman Bialik. Chaim Nachman Bialik said that you can carve out two Einsteins from Rabbi Rosen's brain. That's how impressed he was with the genius of Rabbi Rosen. Not because he was religious. At that point he had become an irreligious man wishing to be secular. But he recognized true genius. And he said that the genius of the Talmudist was far beyond the range of the genius of the physicist. When they told this to Rabbi Rosen, that you can carve out two Einsteins from his brain, he was unimpressed. He says, you know, from the chips we could make 70 Bialiks. The Jewish mind that was developed by the Talmud over the centuries was the first order of magnitude brilliant in its understanding. To say that circumcision somehow rather impeded that mind is to defy the reality. According to that, uncircumcised Jews should do far better in every area. Now, we don't see that. We see the opposite. Another argument that they gave me, or that people gave me, they gave me grief about the story of Aristotle and Alexander. I went looking for it. I couldn't find it, although the story I heard many years ago, I heard it alluded to in a talk of the Lubavitch Rebbe, but not explicitly. But the story, I believe, I heard from a philosopher, a professor of philosophy at Western Ontario University, Dr. Irving Block, Yitzhak Block. And I believe I heard the story from him at that time. The story made a tremendous impression, as did the story of Lord Byron, and he was discussing the very concept of circumcision, how circumcision makes a cut in the sexual organs and separates the person from being an animal in one's relationships to having a higher purpose in mind. Of course, a person who's circumcised could be an animal. But being that you all out there say that the foreskin has these sensitivities and it's extremely sensitive, it's got these nerve endings like no other place, so it really gets aroused very quickly, and it makes it very difficult for a person to say no to themselves. Circumcision allows for the person to sit back and to question whether this is a good idea or not. According to Hasidus, Circumcision is an act that's done in the most pleasurable of the person's anatomy, and that connects the person to the pleasure of God. And therefore, the revelation of God that takes place through circumcision is far greater than any other revelation that we have from any other commandment. The divine delight, the spirituality that is caused by circumcision is unparalleled. I'll give you a bad example where you can understand and take it to the bank. The Torah connects bestiality with the prohibition against sorcery, because in order to become a sorcerer, you have to frustrate and pervert the sexual energy that the person has, to be able to harness that energy and utilize it in channels unknown by normal people. What this is saying is that there's actually a spiritual power in sexual energy that can be directed for good or for evil. And that the more the person directs the sexual energy toward a higher purpose, the holier and greater that person is, the closer to God that person is. And so, mind you, that this is not an amputation, and that precisely because you're willing to give up some of your pleasure for God, that causes the greater pleasure that God has in the process. So, some of you may ask, well, why don't you wait until the kid is old enough? My initial response was, kid's old enough, he may not do it because he's afraid of getting cut. But actually, the real reason is as follows, my friends. A covenant doesn't make any sense. A covenant don't make sense. Because if we like each other, what do we need a covenant for? The answer is if one of the times we get at odds with each other, and normally we would say we'd split up. But because we've made that covenant, that keeps us together, irrespective of the difference of ideas. The whole idea of a covenant is beyond intellect, beyond reasonability, to be connected beyond any limitation. That's when you take a child at its earliest opportunity and connect that child with God. And this is a covenant that's beyond any intellectual concept, because if the child decides to do it, then it's limited by the understanding of the child. The connection of God to the Jewish people defies the intellect. The survival of the Jewish people is something no one can understand. Yet here we are, 3,700 years after the covenant that God made with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I wish you all well, and I want to tell you that we had some grandsons born to us, and they will have a covenant with God when they will be of the proper age. Thank you very much.